Hey, welcome to Woody's Weekly Wisdom. I'm Andrew Woodward from The Investor's Way, and today we've got another crossover episode because there's just too much to talk about today that we can try and only do one story. So there's two big main stories coming out that I wanted to touch on, and I guess fortunately or unfortunately, interest rates are certainly part of today's episode. Now, before I dive in, do us a huge favor so we can spread this news and grow the channel. So hit that subscribe button if you're watching on YouTube and the little bell to get notified. And if you're watching on Facebook or LinkedIn, hit that like button, hit the comment button and tell us what you thought, and even share it to your community so people in your community get to hear what's going on these weekly wisdom videos. Now, first story, backfired spectacularly. We got, I was in, as soon as I saw that, I thought this has got to be something that's going to be of interest. The one mistake behind Australia's interest rate disaster. So some fantastic language in this headline that is bound to have sucked us in to find out what it is. And it sure worked with me because as soon as I saw backfired spectacularly, I thought I had to see what this was all about. And to bring you up to speed, if you haven't been watching these episodes, we've been talking a lot about Australia's interest rates and why they're still so high. And the short story for those playing along at home is that the reason our interest rates allegedly have been so high and kept so high for so long is because of our inflation rate and the fact that the Federal Reserve has a target range of between 2 and 3%. And because we've been above that, they've been extremely reluctant to reduce interest rates. And as a result, so this week, the Reserve Bank of Australia met and they decided to keep interest rates on hold. And that was despite, in the backdrop, a 50 basis point or 0.5% reduction last week in US interest rates. And so I've been talking about that all week, whether it's on Ticker News or here on social media. But generally speaking, if the US is reducing their rates, then that is an indication that they believe their economy is slowing down and as a result needs a little bit of impetus from a reduction in interest rates. And if the US economy is slowing, then that is going to flow on to all of the big economies around the world, including the little one over here in Australia. Even though historically we've been told that we're very much a lot more aligned with what's going on in Asia and in particular China, make no mistake that if the US economy is slowing, then that is going to slow or suggest that other economies are slowing. So then let's get into this article because there's one thing in this story that I think is an interesting backdrop to all of the noise that we've been hearing in relation to our interest rates. So why is it that our interest rates are stubbornly high? And like I said, the Reserve Bank of Australia is very much leaning on their target inflation rate of between 2 and 3%. And if you've been listening to the weekly wisdom videos of the last few weeks, you'll also know that the Australian economy is struggling to grow and only grew in the last data update because of government spending. So technically, we're in a household spending recession. So we're in a household recession in that, the people who have been asked to cut back their spending have done so. And that's, the stick that the Federal, I keep saying the Federal Reserve, the Reserve Bank of Australia, the one stick that they have to deal with inflation is interest rates. And that is designed to slow us down when it comes to our spending. And guess what? It's worked. It's taken a while, but it's worked. And it has definitely slowed our spending down. But the economy is still growing because of two factors, and that is government spending and the government's immigration policy to bring more people in. And only marginally, though. And so our economy is at this difficult phase where we're only marginally growing. And yet our interest rates are really high and stubborn. and the Reserve Bank is reluctant, whilst inflation is still high, to reduce those rates. So then we get this story, as I said, backfired spectacularly, one mistake behind Australia's interest rate disaster. And let me go to the punchline. Well, let's have a look around the world. So, Canada, New Zealand, Europe, the UK, US, and Canada again. So they've done it twice, according to this story. But all of those economies, including China, are slashing rates. But we kept our rates on hold on Tuesday this week. And so, why is that? Scroll a little bit further. We've got stagflation. So I've talked about that, where we're struggling to grow, but we've still got inflation. And what's this huge mistake they made? Well, here we go. The description is that when the Albanese government, the Labor government, came into power, and the Ukraine war erupted, and global gas prices went through the roof, Australia made a bit of a mistake, according to this article, where we allowed a cartel, a large overseas cartel, to dictate what price we should pay for our gas, even though we're producing it. And instead of the historical price of $3 per gigajoule, we had to pay up to $72 per gigajoule for our own gas. And as a result, that put enormous pressure on the electricity prices. And now the government's had to introduce some form of rebates to effectively deal with a market that's out of control because of a decision they made that was about, allegedly, according to this article, I'm not making any political comment here, but according to this article, they made that decision so as not to upset the cartel, and it has effectively backfired dramatically, causing us to pay much, much higher electricity prices than we needed to, which has generated this enormous inflation. And now they've had to provide rebates to enable households to cope with the massively increasing electricity prices. And obviously that has an impact on inflation. And then I guess the double-edged sword of this whole story is that yesterday we saw that our inflation rate had dropped to 2.7%. So suddenly we're in the range. But we can't just look at inflation on its own, because the Reserve Bank wants to also look at these undefined, to an extent, measures, but they want to look at these underlying inflation, or trimmed mean inflation. And unfortunately, that number was still up at 3.5%, down from 3.8 to 3.5. And so the RBA is saying, we still can't do anything on interest rates because the trimmed mean inflation is still above the target zone of 2 to 3. Again, I think this is a whole lot of, let's call it mixing and matching data that they want to use to tell the story that they want to do. And often you'll hear the description that statistics will tell you whatever story you want to tell. You just got to pick the one that you want to tell that story. And I think this is a classic case of where the goalposts are being shifted to whatever piece of data will tell the story that they want to be the headline. But ultimately, what this is saying is that the RBA is still arguing that inflation is still high and they can't cut rates. The data is now suggesting that our inflation is heading in the direction that it needed to. And as I've been saying for some time, the RBA holding off moving on interest rates whilst technically we're in a household recession does not make a lot of sense to me. They're fearful that we're going to get a cut in rates and it's going to lead us to all to go on a spending spree. I just don't see that happening. But I'm only one voice and one consumer, and whilst I speak to a lot of people about their spending habits, I really struggle to see people suddenly going out and going on a massive spending spree after being in a fair amount of pain for the last 18 months. But you can see here that you've got the headline inflation, and then you've got the excluding electricity and the volatiles, which is this mean trimmed version. And so the blue line here is still too high. And you've got the target zone with the actual number. And so, it is a bit of a contradictory story, and the RBA is holding its hat on making sure categorically 100% without a shadow of doubt that inflation does fall into their target zone before they pull the trigger on rates, which may be a little bit late for a soft landing when it comes to the economy. So the US said, we cut our rates, we want a soft landing. Australia says, we're not cutting our rates because we're still not where we want to be. Who's going to end up being right? Who knows? But a very tricky time in relation to interest rates and people's household budgets. So again, I'm just going to be consistent with the message about what does this mean. It generally means that we're getting closer and closer now to that rate cut, and that should enable people some reprieve. And I think the power shift to the consumer to be able to negotiate better rates with their banks is coming, but just not this month from the RBA. And you can see it even here with another article about their grim warning on rates and inflation, just everything that I've just been talking about. So this article just highlights that, sometimes, and more often than not, maybe, without trying to be too political, governments make some dumb decisions, and we're the ones that end up having to wear the cost of those. And what a great segue into the crossover article that I want to talk about today. This one, I'm just going to get out there and show you what it's all about, so that you know to keep an ear on what's happening in this space. So the original article, or the headline of this story, was about the fact that the government of Australia is considering changes to negative gearing. And I know most of you understand what negative gearing is, so I'm not going to go through this article in detail and give you an understanding of negative gearing. You know what it is. But the reason why I wanted to talk about this is off the back of inflation and the high costs of living and the rising interest rates, the housing market has been in all types of struggle. So you've got your existing homeowners paying really high interest rates and struggling to stay on top of their mortgage. The high interest rates have led to landlords having to put interest rates up put rents up, because if their costs are going up, just like a business, if a business's costs are going up, they pass those costs on to the consumer. And a landlord is no different. They are effectively a business owner, they're an investor, and if their costs go up, they're going to pass it on. And so rents have been going through the roof, and people are finding it very, very hard to get into the property market. And so there's a real housing dilemma. And as per normal, one of the things that a government does when there's a dilemma in any particular space, but in particular the housing space, is, let's have a look at negative gearing, and maybe we make some changes there to make it easier for first home buyers to get into the market. What they don't realise is every time they raise this, the property investors have to explain to the government, whether it's a Labor or a Liberal or whatever government you look at. I mean, it tends to be the Labor government that raises this. Last time they did it, they lost an election. But the reason that they need to understand the benefits of negative gearing go well beyond the impact to their tax collections, but it actually provides a market for properties, whether they are new properties being built or properties being bought to enable people to rent them. The investor market is a very important part of the housing economy, the housing environment. And by removing negative gearing, they are going to not achieve what they want to achieve, and that is reduced housing prices. They're just probably going to lead to much bigger issues. So as I said, I wanted to raise this just so that you know it's on the radar. And so when it comes to property investing and any decisions you might be making, be very mindful that this is on the radar. it appears this article doesn't have a lot of detail because clearly the government hasn't provided it yet, but it appears that it wouldn't necessarily mean negative gearing is gone for good or gone completely. It suggests maybe that it's paring it back to maybe only being available on new properties, or reducing the extent of application of negative gearing. But it's on the radar again. It tends to come up every election cycle, and tends to be the Labor government looking at ways to pare it back. And so I wanted you to be aware of it, so that when it comes to your investing decisions, you can be mindful of it. I always believe, and it's not 100% accurate, but I believe that any changes they make to negative gearing will not be backdated, and therefore would only apply from whenever the legislation is passed and going forward. So your existing properties would be fine. It would only be new properties that may be impacted. So that may well also influence your decision making if this potentially proposed policy change does actually start to grow some legs. It's early days, and I just wanted to raise it so that you are aware of it, in obviously conjunction with everything else that's going on in relation to interest rates and inflation and all the rest. So lots going on in the news, lots of market data, and the impact of that market data to your day-to-day money and wealth creation goals. So hopefully that was helpful. As always, leave us a comment down below to let me know what you thought and what your thoughts are about some of these things that we're seeing in the data that's being released, and the decision making being made by whether it's the RBA or the government in response to that data. So that's Woody's Weekly Wisdom, episode number 68. Hopefully you found that helpful. Leave us a comment, let us know, share it with your friends, and I'll see you again next week for more weekly wisdom. Cheers.